Whenever people are ready.
Excuse me.
He squeezes harder, and Cameron's eyes roll up, all while putting the key in his own pocket. But he's not sure it matters. Brian already heard his plan. More importantly, though, is that Brian isn't letting up. As he fades into darkness, Cameron feels a part of himself die. The trip peaks, and suddenly, Cameron is everything at once. He's a trailer home in the Northwest. He's a desert lake. He's a broken road. He's a trailer home in the Southwest. He's a train cutting through the wilderness.
Cameron's got a trailer sauna.
He's being shot in the head. He's being hung from a tree. He's being beaten to death. He's swimming under an arch. He's stumbling into a pond. He's in a space shuttle, smashing into the ocean. He's a dead town.
Oh man, that's really sad that he had the swimming under an arch one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dead, but with working reflexes, using the tools that it still holds tightly in its grasp.
I just want to go back here real quick, because there's one thing that I'm curious about. He's stumbling into a pond. Like, all these are about deaths for people. And, like, the first three are, like, different people who died in Echo. The fourth is definitely his mom. Is the fifth one what happened to Devin's sister?
Huh. I don't know. Cameron disappears, and these thoughts and feelings are no longer his, because he isn't who he is. He is everything. And because of that, he can see everything.
Alright. And we are back finally with Build 7 of Arches.
Boy.
We got the gang here, the Arches gang. Yeah!
Yeah!
And look at all the arches.
Oh, yeah? Oh.
So many arches.
Jeez.
Right. Is this an art museum? I'm sorry, what did I stumble into?
Oh, boy. Congratulations, Fane. You came in just for, like, close to the ending. This is the second to last build of Arches. The final build is out on Patreon now. We're gonna get it when it's made public. And we're just trying to get through this before we get too many spoilers, because everyone seems to be reacting very vehemently on Twitter. And I'm like, I don't want spoilers.
Right. So I guess I walk back this way to the train exhibit.
Oh, no. The train exhibit's over by the otters.
Ah, sweet. Thanks.
Unfortunately, there was a train exhibit next to the otters.
Alright, so is everyone ready to go?
Yeah.
Yep.
Alright.
Pain pounds rhythmically in their head like a heavy drumbeat, making their ears pin back tightly before they begin to whine. Then they croak as their sore throat protests against making the sound. They stare at the scene before them. Then they blink. But it doesn't help them make better sense of what's in front of them. In fact, it seems to make it worse. Who's making sense of what that's in front of who? these intrusive thoughts about not existing? Who's having these thoughts?
See, you're coming round.
Fear rises up in his throat. Something deep in his brain telling him to flee that voice, to escape from it. But he's still too confused to figure out who or what he even is right now, because he still feels like nothing. But he's also still conscious enough to know that he is, in fact, something. He remembers that he's someone named Cameron. He remembers his situation. And he remembers that he's been drugged with shrooms and Xanax. His trip has reached its dizzying peak. His sense of self so utterly decimated that he isn't sure how he's ever going to feel the same again. The terror and torture of the past 2 days has culminated to this, the moment that his mind gives in and breaks, and Cameron can't tell what's real and what isn't anymore. You realize nothing's real. But there's something else too. Despite the terrible loss of who he was, Cameron, this amalgamation he calls Cameron, is sensing things even more vividly than he had just a few minutes ago when he'd contacted Dev. Cameron sees what's ahead of him, but he's seeing so much more. In his mind's eye, he looks forward and sees a myriad of people in front of him, though they're all the same people. Devon, Brian, and himself, locked in a vicious spinning blur of claws, teeth, blood, and horrific, unidentifiable viscera. It's confusing, seeing so many versions of himself and his boyfriend, and he turns his head to glance away, not wanting to see that violence. Then, noticing something over his shoulder, he looks back, and this time he sees one version of himself, along with Brian. He sees his unconscious body being pinned against the tree for a while longer before he crumples to the ground.
What the hell?
His voice is low, husky, and barely audible. Brian laughs, startling the coyote out of his visions of violence.
I choked you the fuck out, that's what!
Cameron blinks at the bear, then back at the forest.
I thought I died.
Not yet, kid. We got a few things to do first. And you probably want to see your boyfriend too, eh? Not sure you'll get to talk to him since he's knocked out.
Knocked out?
Yep.
Wait, with what?
Relax, it's just Ropanol. Sure, I gave him a good amount, but they're a few decades old because they made them illegal in the States back in the 90s. And you know, when pills get old, they don't work so good anymore.
Brian goes on and on about Rohypnol and how it used to be the premier date rape drug in the country.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise here about Brian being that type of a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
Cameron watches the bear's mouth move in waves and ripples, yellow teeth poking out from behind his lips as saliva collects then becomes frothy at the corners. Who's watching this? Cameron reassures himself automatically.
I'm watching this, and I need to save Devin.
He's not so convinced by the first part, though.
Me, Cameron. Simple concepts that aren't so simple anymore.
Just like in high school, he stopped existing. It's different this time, though. The Xanax is certainly quashing the panic he should be feeling right now. But this time, his perspective is from a completely different angle. Cameron's amalgamation does still exist, but the borders have dissolved, and he seems to be seeping into everything. Despite already knowing he's insignificant, he's still awestruck by how small Cameron is compared to the world. Even the bugs crawling beneath the leaves make Cameron feel small. An entire world he knows nothing about. But entangling his identity with the universe means he's also entangled with Brian. The bear is missing parts of himself, kind of like Artie, shattered pieces and jagged holes, pockmarking the landscape of his life. Cameron almost feels sorry for him, that maybe if things had been just a little different, the odds just a little more in Brian's favor, he could have been a very different person. What's really disturbing, though, is the genuine affection he has for Cameron. His urge to caress and hold that coyote, but there's a hatred there too, a disgust for what Cameron is. Young, attractive, and a squeak. Not just queer, like Brian considers himself to be, but a squeak. The kind of queer that acts real cute before fucking over the real men who should be doing all of the fucking.
Man, I'm sorry. I think this,
I'm just realizing what I was saying.
I know. I think this is basically like your version of having to do the period speech.
Yeah. I'm just like, okay, that's what he's saying, alright. So, it feels good to punish Cameron, but it's even better to watch him suffer, to watch the way his body writhes, his mouth open for air, his eyes wide and fearful. Cameron feels himself recoil from understanding Brian's thought process, a way of thinking he'd never consider himself. But that thought process isn't what makes Brian the terrible person that he is. Cameron knows that most don't have a say in how their sexual interests and fetishes develop, so the thoughts themselves aren't exactly evil, at least not to Cameron. Cameron knew a few guys from college who had interests similar to Brian. During his first year of dating Devin, the bear had timidly asked him if he could gently close his teeth over the coyote's neck and growl. It was thrilling and intense, and Cameron loved the rush. But then Devin had a nightmare about tearing out Cameron's throat, and that was the end of that. So to Cameron, Brian isn't all that strange. What makes Brian different isn't that he has fetishes. He's not crazy. He's not a psychopath. No, the true root of Brian's evil is clear. He's selfish, and he's never satisfied with what he gets.
Okay, this is interesting, and I just want to take a little moment to talk about that. Brian not having a mental disorder is a interesting thing to bring up because he seemed like it back in Echo. And in
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
version, in Arches here, he has definitely not seemed like he had a mental disorder. So I'm wondering if the writers are trying to like either backtrack on that or if they're trying to better explain how they originally wanted Brian to come across. Because I do agree he's very selfish.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he doesn't show some of the behaviors that they had him portray in Echo.
hmm Yeah, because he was like watching TV and watching cartoons and kind of seemed almost like infantilized, weirdly enough.
Yeah, and also doing a lot of self-harm things.
hmm
Mhm.
Yeah, it almost feels like this is a different version of Brian compared to what was in Echo, which, considering we talked about earlier, like how this kind of can't be a sequel to any of the routes in Echo, it makes some sense.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I can't not notice that this kind of sounds like the background music. Reminds me of Minecraft.
Mm.
Um, it's very similar in some aspects, but I'll talk about that later.
Oh yeah, no, the music here in Arches is just so good. I recommend trying to listen to like the soundtrack at some point. It's posted on Anthemic's channel.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Selfish enough to put dozens of young people through hellish torture until they finally died. All while having the capacity to fully control himself. All while having full access to alternatives like roleplay. But it's not enough. He always needs more. All for his own, fleeting, drug-fueled sexual gratification, because at one point, Brian decided that's what makes him feel good. So, fuck this world that makes him feel bad. But he'd found some release in strangling Cameron. Now his focus is turning back to a vague idea on how to use Cameron's ability. Something to stop him from spending the rest of eternity with his victims torturing him. Cameron could spoil the ending for Brian. Just let him know that when everyone dies, they just cease to be what they were. That's it. Ghosts, demons, poltergeists, creations of the living, and whatever it is that's an echo. Cameron draws back at this point, feeling overwhelmed by all the thoughts coming from the old bear, unable to understand them without more context. Looking forward, he glimpses the various scenarios again, and the one constant is death.
I do like when he's looking forward, he's looking literally at us.
Yeah, I noticed that. Most involve him dying, and a good amount involve Devon dying as well. Cameron imagines that this is indicative of what's most likely to happen. But a few, just two in fact, showed Cameron and Devon surviving, with Brian either living or dying. Cameron doesn't care much about the latter, just as long as he can get Devon and himself out of Echo alive. They can deal with Brian afterwards. Cameron doesn't even care much if he doesn't make it, especially in this state of mind, but he won't accept not being able to save Devon. Suddenly remembering what he had done earlier, Cameron tries to subtly brush his pocket, and is amazed that the key is still there. Does Brian know? Well, he does know what Cameron had planned, but in his own excitement, and especially because he's tweaked out, he's hyper-focusing on other things. He'd also missed the key being taken out of his pocket. That and Brian's memory is terrible. Decades of drugs at neurotoxic doses had dismantled who he used to be. He doesn't even seem to remember why he choked Cameron in the first place.
Had to make connections down in Sonora. The stuff was over the fucking counter over there, so it was easy to get. But getting it over the fucking border is a whole different issue.
Brian suddenly stops talking, his eyes narrowing. Cameron's pulse quickens as he wonders if Brian had just remembered his plan.
What's wrong?
His voice is still rough from the strangling, a deep soreness starting to emanate from the core of his neck.
I don't know. I just like you better when you were smiling. But I'm fucking boring you, so just say so.
It takes Cameron a few seconds to understand what Brian is even talking about, then a few more to scan the bear's thoughts. In Brian's mind, his smiling has a lot to do with how interesting the bear's over-explanation of Roipinol is, so Cameron quickly puts one on his face.
Oh, sorry. It is really interesting. I'm just so overwhelmed with the drugs and...
Shut up.
Cameron shuts up. Brian starts to work his jaw, like he's chewing something, before clenching his fists. Cameron tenses up, preparing himself to be hit again.
You're cute, but not that cute. And I'm not that stupid. I hate squeaks like you, sucking up and sucking dick so you can get what you really want.
Brian's mind flicks through a few faces, but the only one defined enough for Cameron to comprehend is a fox in a red hat.
Oh god, and I just realized you guys haven't seen this yet in Echo. Would you guys like me to explain why the fox in the red hat's important? Or do you want to wait till you see it in Echo and I explain it there?
Is that one of Brian's victims, or is that a different...
It is a victim of Brian's, but we actually got to learn more about this person in a couple of other routes.
Okay.
Because this person was somewhat important.
Okay.
I will just say they are dead by the time Echo starts.
Okay.
Mhm.
Alrighty. I don't think we necessarily need to know more than that at this point.
Okay.
Then Brian seems to relax, but the anger is still there. The bear having honed it to become more cool and collected, which only makes it all the more terrifying. Sure, stimulants increase empathy in a normal brain, but if Brian abused them to the point that amphetamine feels like caffeine, then it probably only increases his irritability and rage. That's what his mother was like at the end, and it always confused Cameron as to why someone would want to do a drug that makes them feel worse.
I got a better idea.
Cameron Cameron gasps as Brian grabs him by the ear.
No, no, stop! I can walk with you! I won't try to run. Ow!
Cameron senses the bear's amusement at his fear of being pulled up by his ear again, so the coyote quickly stifles his begging, realizing it might shift Brian's interest back to using Cameron for torture rather than his abilities. The pain had been blinding, but it's nothing. Absolutely nothing compared to what this bear has done to others. Cameron manages to settle into a stumbling walk as Brian pulls him along, bent over and trying to see the ground in the darkness, all while he tries to carefully follow the bear's rough, unpredictable movements. Every minute or so, Cameron looks forward and sees the scenario he's aiming for, still within reach, so he keeps walking. Meanwhile, a van emerges from the trees, parked a ways off the side of the road. Brian freezes, staring. Then, he lets out a surprised laugh.
Well, I'll be damned. The fucker got away.
Ooh.
The coyote winces as Brian continues to hold him by his ear. Cameron hopes that he's talking about Devon, even though he can sense the presence of the younger bear just ahead of them. The coyote would be glad to be proven wrong about his abilities, especially if it means Devon gets away. But Cameron knows.
That cat! I swear I shot him twice, too. And again, he didn't do that weird jerking thing people do when you give him the kill shot, so I must have missed the second time. Thought maybe I'd just kill him with the first.
Cameron looks where Brian is staring, and sees the spot where Arturo must have been. Dark stains cover the leaves, along with what looks like vomit, and Cameron feels his own stomach churn at the sight. It's difficult to connect his outgoing, oblivious friend to the mess, and Cameron feels guilt mingle with his misery as he realizes that what's happening to Artie is their fault. But he knows Artie is far away now, miles away, and Cameron silently encourages the cat to keep going, to do whatever he can to save them and himself, even though he's clearly in terrible shape. Cameron hopes Artie can hear him, even if he's awake right now. Cameron senses another ominous shift in the bear's motivation. Brian doesn't think that Artie will make it to the interstate, but he knows he should go looking for the cat. But everything was so fucked up from the start. 3 young men, who likely have close family and friend groups, all 3 of them injured, beaten, and all 3 knowing full well what Brian is capable of. What Brian has done. There's no point to it anymore. Brian had almost reverted to thinking he'd get away with all of this somehow. But no. This is the end.
Okay.
There we go. There we go. Well, guess that's it then. Figured it was getting close for a while now.
The calm with which Brian accepts his nearing demise makes Cameron want to try to escape all over again. Why can't this bear just end it without taking them down with him? It's the end for him, not them.
Can I see Devin?
Cameron half-heartedly smiles, hoping it might sway the bear, but he's not paying attention to the coyote. Brian shakes his head at the sober version of himself. The version that actually did plan to let Cameron go. Because why would he add to his problems by killing the yote if said yote would take them all away? That's why he'd tried to be so nice to him. And then, of course, things got out of hand. Cameron begins to shake as he senses Brian's arousal and excitement. He's thinking about Cameron, about his baggie full of bath salts, and about how long it might take to find the men. Cameron blanches mentally, unsure of what that dark place full of death is, but he knows he does not want to go there.
Where are you taking me?
You're the psychic. Figure it out.
Keeping his hold of the coyote, Brian pulls Cameron toward the van.